Real incomes in Singapore continue to edge up this year, exceeding average gains over the past decade. Now, according to the Manpower Ministry's latest report, those at the 20th percentile have seen incomes rise 3.8% from last year, while median incomes grew 4.3% over the same period. Caitlin Ng with this report.
You might not feel it in your day-to-day, but Singapore's real incomes have been rising. Lower inflation so far this year has helped boost purchasing power, alongside gains in productivity.
What we are seeing is an increasing quality as well as even contribution of many of our work in terms of their skill set, in terms of their professionalization.
That rise in value-added work is showing up in the labour market. The share of professionals, managers, executives and technicians among employed residents increased from 63.8% in 2024 to 64.2% this year. The biggest gains were in sectors like finance and insurance and infocoms, where PMETs made up about 9 in 10 residents.
I think this is actually quite encouraging in the sense that many of us expect that PMET will be displaced by the current AI revolution.
Notably, the share of permanent employees also reached a new high of 90.8%, with increases across most industries. While that suggests better job stability,
I would say that nothing is permanent about being permanent. All workers in all categories will have to be on their toes, work harder, work smarter, so that they can continue to be permanent.
Overall, resident unemployment and long-term unemployment remained low. Across occupation groups, PMET unemployment held at 2.8%, while the rate for non-PMETs dropped from 3.4% to 2.8%. The number of discouraged workers, who are those outside of the labour force and not actively looking, as they believe the search will be unsuccessful, stayed low at 0.3% of the resident labour force. Still, MOM says that global uncertainties will continue to weigh on hiring, so the impact remains to be seen.
In a social media post, Manpower Minister Tan See Leng says that even amid global uncertainty, the agenda remains clear, and that is to support Singaporeans to reskill and build their career health. He says fair and inclusive workplaces and flexible work arrangements will remain key areas of focus to ensure that everyone can continue contributing regardless of circumstance. Now, overall, Singapore's labour force participation rate for those aged 15 and above declined for the 4th straight year. It's now at 67.9%, down from 68.2% in 2024. MOM says this is due to the ageing population. Still, Singapore's overall participation rate remains one of the highest across OECD countries. Also helping to offset the impact of an older labour force are more women working. What was a 74.1% rate in 2015 has gone up to 80.5% this year. The ministry cites higher education and availability of childcare as factors that have contributed to this rise. Now, MOM is also tracking the global exposure of Singapore's labour force for the first time. Overall, just over 3% has had such experience, with the most common countries being mainland China, the United States and Malaysia. And Caitlin Ng tells us more.
Sydney's bustling streets became a classroom for Tan Wan Sia, giving her new responsibilities, networks and an experience she now brings back to Singapore.
I was able to adapt the strategies based on the real-time feedback and build stronger relationships across the teams here and across different culture.
Since a 6-month stint, Ms. Tan now serves as a trainer and learning partner within the regional team. And with her experience paving the way, the firm is sending more staff abroad.
It's very important for us to, when we talk about globalize, it's also about localize, right? About how we can localize our product according to the needs to the local market.
According to MOM's report, such stints were found to be the most common among mid-career workers in their 40s to 50s. More than half had their first overseas posting between the ages of 25 and 34. Manufacturing, financial and insurance services, as well as information and communications were identified as the industries with the most overseas assignments. And as companies compete for global talent, international exposure is becoming more important.
We've observed that multinational companies or even startups in Asia increasingly at the final selection process do tend to lean towards candidates with overseas exposure, more so because of their ability to, adapt to certain environments, the level of presentation and communication skills with different cultures and understanding the nuances of different markets.
Ms. Lin adds that it's not just about working overseas, but developing soft skills like adaptability and resilience, qualities that will stand out to employers.
Now, to unpack the latest labour force data is Associate Professor Ong Yi Ching, who joins us on Zoom from Penang. Now, Yi Ching, with the economy still facing some uncertainty and also firms becoming more cautious when it comes to hiring, what is the wage outlook for next year? Should workers be prepared for slower wage growth in 2026?
So the National Wages Council just released their guidelines early this month, and they did issue several reminders, especially with regards to the flexible wage system, right? And in particular, they also mentioned that lower wage workers should expect increments of 5.5 to 7.5%. And of course, the degree to which, employers are going to abide by those guidelines depends on how tied they are to, let's say, a progressive wage model, for example. On the broader sense of the flexible wage system, I think it's something that we can it really comes in handy now because, as we know, with the Trump tariffs and the geopolitical conflicts, there is a lot of uncertainty. And we recognize that certain industries, they may not be exactly sure of which way the wind is going to blow. And the recommendation is to, if you're not really sure, you can say to your workers, maybe we'll do with smaller wage increments this year, but with the understanding that if it turns out to be better than expected, then companies should actually reward their workers with higher bonuses, right? So therein lies the flexibility.
Now, if you take a look at Singapore's labour force participation, that has edged down again this year, mostly because older workers are retiring. What else is driving this trend?
So the labour force participation rate in all age groups has actually remained fairly steady or even inched up. The one exception is actually the 15 to 24-year-olds. So if you think about it, is it a good thing or a bad thing that labour force participation is declining for 15 to 24-year-olds? And I would say it's actually a good thing because they are spending more time in education and training, right? So that is the upside. The other thing you mentioned, obviously, with the aging population, that one is actually, it's really interesting. So I took a look at the statistics. Resident labor force, basically everyone who is 15 or older, guess how many of them are age 55 or older? It's almost 2 in 5. So it is true that we do have an aging population, we do have an aging labor force, and the fact that people start retiring in their 50s and 60s, right? That just means, statistically speaking, it's just logical that our labor force participation rate overall is going to fall.
And what does all of this mean then for the long-term sustainability of our workforce? If this continues, should we be concerned?
Right. So on the one hand, we worry about aging labor force, shrinking labor force. On the other hand, there are still allegations of ageism, discrimination against older workers. So if you can actually find a way to support these older workers who do want to continue to remain in labor force and who are still productive, I think it's a win-win for all, right? And some studies have shown that teams with older and younger workers actually outperform teams with just younger workers. And you can imagine that the older workers, they will have more experience, they will have some wisdom, they may have more resilience, right? So I don't think we should just, shun aside the older workers and then wring our hands and say that, we don't have enough workers. The other thing to keep in mind is that with productivity, with technological improvements, it's highly likely that we may not need so many workers, right? And even each individual worker, it's very possible that we don't have to work as many hours as we used to. So I don't think it's time to just sort of like panic and say like, oh no, we don't have any more workers, right? There are a lot of other things going on.
Now, another thing to look at is the female participation in the workforce. That's now just over 80%. What does this say when it comes to evolving social norms and also the workplace policies here?
So the 80% is a very good rate. It's actually higher than the OECD average of 77%. And more interestingly, if we look at a full-time employment rate, that's actually about 72%, which again is higher than the OECD average, which is about 60%. Right. So I think it does say something about how education, cultural norms, social norms, workplace policies have really worked to normalize women being in the workplace. Although I do want to say that I think it's now time to maybe push more to see women in leadership positions. Because if we look at, for example, in business, in finance, in politics, in academia, there is actually a severe absence of women in leadership positions.
Now, we're also seeing a record high share of employees that are staying in permanent jobs, and that's even as job switching is declining. What is behind this drop in mobility?
So it is something that a very cute name has been coined in the last year or so. It's called job hugging, and it's also observed in the US, for example. And behind it, I think people suspect what's attributable to the rise is this very uncertain economic outlook, right? So we know that, again, as we mentioned, Trump tariffs, the geopolitical conflicts, and also the rise of AI. So firms are trying to see the degree to which AI can actually replace labor, replace human workers. And we've seen very high-profile layoffs in the past few years. We've seen, more news about massive investment in AI, less employment, less job openings, especially in early careers. So that's actually something to look out for.
Yi Cheng, thank you so much for your analysis. That was Associate Professor Ong Yi Cheng there from the Department of Economics at NUS.